Finally, we're seeing some arrests in the farm invasion attack on a Hutterite colony in southern Alberta. However, Global News was far more involved than just being the innocent, curious bystanders they presented themselves as. 4 people were charged yesterday in the nearly 2-month-old invasion of a Hutterite colony free-range turkey farm in southern Alberta. The September 2nd farm invasion started in the early hours of the morning when dozens of animal rights activists took a school bus to the Jumbo Valley Hutterite colony farm near Pincher Creek and staged a sit-in occupying one of the turkey barns and thus jeopardizing the biosecurity of the entire flock. Now, before the protesters eventually left, and despite the fact that local RCMP had been on the scene and collecting names and information for the duration of the onslaught, the protesters wanted their demands met, and the local RCMP helped them to negotiate with the farmers. The activists wanted to rescue, translation burgle, 5 turkeys, and they wanted a news crew to be allowed to tour the turkey barns. And Global News was on the scene, maybe a little too conveniently, and they were happy to oblige the terroristic demands of the protesters. Just watch.
In the end, the farm owners agreed to a deal with the protesters who demanded and were given 5 turkeys to take to a rescue sanctuary. The group says they wanted media to have full access to the turkey barns, which we were allowed. The owner says he has nothing to hide.
Finally, yesterday, Maxwell Ming Ma, Claire Buchanan, Kennedy Ray Herbert, and a 16-year-old girl whose name cannot be revealed were charged with 1 count each of break and enter to commit mischief. And later on, yesterday afternoon, because of course they did, several activists chained themselves to the Edmonton Legislature building to protest the arrests. Police doing something I absolutely wouldn't do, unchained these people. Now, if you got all your news from the mainstream media, like the Edmonton Journal, CTV News, Okotoks Online, Lethbridge Now, the Calgary Sun, or for that matter, the insufferable CBC, you wouldn't know that one of those 4 protesters arrested was a Global News employee. Maxwell Ming Ma is an employee at Global Edmonton, and we find that out in the 3rd to last sentence in the Global News story on the arrests. I suppose they had to divulge that information before somebody else found out, but it is absolutely not being reported in any of the other mainstream media coverage. You know, I always thought it was a slight bit sketchy how Global News ended up being part of these terroristic extortion demands done by these farm invading protesters to our peaceful Hutterite friends. Of all the news agencies, it sure was curious why Global News was chosen when the protesters demanded that a news crew be allowed to wander the farm and, like I explained earlier, put the animals at biohazard risk. Well, now we know. Global had a man on the inside, or rather the protesters had a man on the inside of Global. And yet, in any story that Global News did about the protest prior to now, they never acknowledged that one of their employees was part of the crime, when that was likely how Global News was tipped off about the whole mess in the first place. At the very least, Global News withheld information about a story that directly involved them from the public. And at worst, Global News was a willing participant in meeting these extortion demands on peaceful Alberta farmers. But there's yet another angle to this story besides the obvious scandal of Global News and their employee who was embedded with the activists, or rather, is it that he was an activist embedded at Global News? Is it the chicken or the egg here, or does it even matter? Imagine if, let's say, my friend Cian Bexty was arrested for trespassing at a local dairy farm, which we absolutely know Cian would never do because he's law-abiding and he cares about the property rights and farm safety of Alberta farmers more than he hates the Soviet-style milk quota system we have imposed on us here in Canada. Do you think the mainstream media would leave that fact out of a story about the arrest of milk quota protesters? Of course not. We would never hear the end of it. It would be on every news site for over a week. CBC would convene a panel of hand-wringers and professional scolds to admonish us at Rebel News for being nothing more than a bunch of activists. It would be used to discredit the work of every single one of us here at Rebel News. I can already hear Rosie Barton now, can't you? Squawking at the top of her lungs, her disdain for the stunt like some forlorn, lovelorn peacock. It would no longer be just a local news story, but instead a national scandal and yet another reason for some cowardly conservative politician to avoid talking to us. And yet, this information about the Global News employee, well, it's hardly newsworthy to the mainstream media outside of Global News, who had to begrudgingly acknowledge the fact at the very end of their story about the arrests. You know why that is? It's because you just can't trust the mainstream media. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. What you just saw there is an example of the daily video that I do here at The Rebel, but did you know that I have my own weekly full-length show? It's aptly called The Gun Show. It airs on Wednesday or whenever is convenient for you to watch, because this is the internet. And I talk to newsmakers and thinkers that you just won't see in the mainstream media. But to get access to my show and the rest of our incredible premium content, you need to treat yourself to a Rebel subscription today. You can do that at premium.rebelnews.com.